people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the mother relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Per a tweet from Michael Benson via Mike Kopinger, Vasyl Lomachenko is reportedly now contemplating retirement. We knew that was the case immediately after the George Kambosos fight because Vasyl Lomachenko himself said as much. But the only reason he even went through with that fight was for his father.
His dad likely didn't want him to retire off the controversial loss to Devin Haney. He wanted him to go out on a high. He wanted him to go out on a win.
Now he can. He can retire on his own terms, retire from the sport and not be retired by it, like so many fighters before him sail off into the sunset. I think the Devin Haney fight took the last bit of passion away from Vasyl Lomachenko. The robbery, I should say, because I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That was daylight robbery.
Plain old robbery.
I think Vasyl Lomachenko would be of a different mindset here today. He would have a different attitude and demeanor if he were awarded the victory he so rightfully deserved. That's why some people don't like Devin. Some people. That's the motivating factor, that he clearly lost that fight, and he was allowed to skate with a win.
Pisses people off.
For Vasyl Lomachenko, I think it disillusioned him. It completely soured him to the sport of boxing, and he conjured his abilities as a boxer one last time to stop George Kambosos, but the passion just isn't there anymore, and that was indicative when he decided to take the rest of the year off.
Skipping out on negotiations to fight Gervonta Davis later on this year to go fishing.
What used to be a fight that he was in hot pursuit of for many years, it doesn't motivate him anymore. He doesn't care. And Tank's fans, in their typical and tactless fashion, are now claiming that the reason he's retiring is because he doesn't want to fight Tank.
Oh, so it's all about Tank to you.
Do you remember in my previous video, the guy who was carrying on about B-side Bud this and B-side Bud that, the man down guy, the Spence fan? That same guy said, if I knew I had to fight Tank, I would retire too.
Seems he doesn't know his two from his two.
Not surprising that a lesser mind like this one is befuddled by homonyms.
Stupid.
With stupid boxing takes, really stupid boxing takes, typical of what you find in the American boxing scene. You think that after all this, the reason he's retiring is to avoid Gervonta.
So did you miss the first 7 years of Gervonta Davis avoiding him? Or are you pretending that you missed it so you can claim a victory now?
There is a cowardice in the sport of boxing, not just in the industry, but amongst the fans too. An opportunistic cowardice.
The best way to describe it.
Cowards that are looking for a victory however they can find one, wherever they can find one, irrespective of what the facts are. The fact of the matter is, Gervonta Davis waited until this guy was talking about retiring to try to fight him. But for 7 years, he avoided that fight. Paper trail is as clear as day.
You want to rewrite history to accommodate the fighter whose penis you want to put in your mouth.
Because there is something morbid about having to lie to yourself this much, being this obtuse.
Delusions about Errol Spence Jr., delusions about Gervonta Davis.
Delusions from the deluded.
But enough about him.
Vasyl Lomachenko needs to hurry up and make a decision. And the longer it takes him to make that decision, the more it heralds his retirement. That if you wanted to stay in the sport of boxing, if you still had the motivation, it wouldn't take you this long.
You'd be Johnny on the spot with an answer. No, I'm not retiring. There's still more I want to do.
Staying is the struggle. Staying in the sport. Finding a reason to. You've already been a champion at 3 weights. You've already made good money, very good money.
Won titles. What else is there left to do?
If the fight that you were pursuing for so long no longer excites you and no longer gets you out of bed, no longer motivates you, then it is time to hang them up. It's time to retire.
Let the belt go. Let somebody else, more motivated than you are, more in love with the sport right now than you are, Let them fight for that belt.
Don't hold the division up with your indecision.
Indecisiveness.
If he gave up the belt right now, it would seem that William Zepeda is the guy most in line to catch it. Behind William Zepeda are unbeaten up-and-comers Keyshawn Davis and Raymond Muratalla. These are the guys that are most in line to fight for that belt. If Lomachenko gave it up right now,
Looks like he's going to.
I wish him all the best in what was, for the most part, a successful boxing career.
I figured we'd never see that fight with Gervonta and Lomachenko.
The byproduct of that is the upcoming Gervonta Davis versus Lamont Roach fight, which is largely being criticized by the boxing community at large, given the price point for the show versus the opponent.
Matchroom impresario Eddie Hearn addressed those criticisms, offering up more understanding than either I or you.
What's your reaction to Tank fighting Mr. Roach, Lamont Roach?
I mean, I think the online reaction is a little bit unfair. Like, everybody hates the fight, but Lamont Roach is a good fighter. Like, it's not like, but the problem is no one knows who he is. And I think with, Tank's position in the sport, people want him to be in the big fights, and it's not a big fight. But Lamont Roach is a good fighter. Like, and if you know your boxing, you know it's a good fight. But he is a super featherweight. But it's, what were the options?
It doesn't matter, because if this is who you ended up with, it's all the same. The fight costs too much. We get better fights than this. We're literally getting a better fight than this. A way better fight this weekend that doesn't cost $75 or $80.
Better Beef versus Beevil.
So you have to make it make sense. You have to explain to the consumer, why does Gervonta's fight cost so much more than that one if that one's a better fight than his?
Why?
I don't think there is an explanation. You can't justify charging in between $75 to $80 for a fight that no one was asking for against a super featherweight, not even a lightweight, a super featherweight that most boxing fans are not familiar with, and the ones that are, they still don't want to pay. I watched Jamel Herring outbox Lamont Roach years ago. I don't know if you guys remember, but I do, and I remember Jamel outboxed this guy, and when he did, it didn't cost me an arm and a leg to watch it. Now, if you want to say that Lamont Roach got better, that he's improved over time, well, maybe he has. But for what this costs, he better be shooting lasers out of his eyes and fire out of his ass.
He better.
Because what this is tantamount to is going to a restaurant and paying steak prices for the garlic bread.
Parallel doesn't make any sense.
Neither does this fight. The abuse of the pay-per-view model in the American market is what has caused the market to shrink overall. Too many fights ending up behind a paywall for no reason other than the fighters and their managers want to make off like bandits by gouging the boxing fans.
The fans are not putting up with it.
And the only explanation being offered up is, well, he did try to fight Lomachenko. That would have been a better fight, a bigger fight. But this fight is not a substitute for that one. That you tried to get him and it didn't work out doesn't make me want to spend my money on this fight.
It's not unfair that they're criticizing him. He's been pulling this crap for years.
So maybe now that Eddie is making nice with Leonard Ellerby and they've buried the hatchets, he doesn't want to go after Gervonta. He doesn't want to criticize him. Maybe that's what it is, because it's very obvious what's wrong with this picture.
He doesn't want to say it, but I will.
It's not pay-per-view just because you say it is, and it's not pay-per-view worthy just because it involves Gervonta. Gervonta and who?
The guy I was watching for free on ProBox a few weeks ago?
Get real. Pay-per-view is intended to be for the biggest of the big fights and the biggest of the big names. Fights that have been built up.
What it's not supposed to be is GoFundMe for boxers.
GoFundMe for promoters and people in boxing that no longer have a major broadcaster giving them a budget due to their poor business practices.
It's for the biggest of the big fights.
All we're seeing is fighters with big demands in the absence of big fights. Now, the alternative that I've highlighted more than once is that if Gervonta really wanted to make a big fight involving a top-ranked fighter, but the one he wanted wasn't available, you should have went after Teofimo.
One top-ranked fighter is as good as another. You can't hide behind the sides of the street argument when you were just negotiating with a top-ranked fighter. So if he's not available for whatever reason, Why didn't you just move on to another?
Move on to Teofimo, who was available. He ain't got nothing going on for the rest of this year. That would have been a bigger fight and a better fight than the one you're about to have.
Or is it that you didn't want to fight a top-ranked guy unless he was courting retirement? That's the only circumstance where you would fight one of their guys.
That unless the guy's in his mid to late 30s and thinking about walking away from the sport, you don't want to deal with them or their fighters. So here's my prediction. Gervonta is once again fighting a super featherweight at lightweight that in all likelihood he's going to knock out, and his sycophant fans are going to act surprised. Act like he just climbed Mount Everest for beating a guy
Like they didn't know what was going to happen.
everyone knew he would beat. And he himself is likely going to do a backflip off the top rope in a disproportionate celebration for what is not a big fight, not a big win. The journos are going to play along in this pantomime,
The podcasters, too, some of them.
saying that Gervonta is a superstar. Look at his highlight reel knockout. He's the face of boxing. The DEI face of boxing, maybe.
Not the real one, and not in the traditional sense.
While being cloak and dagger about the pay-per-view buys, the pay-per-view sales. What did he do with Frank Martin? What is he going to do with this fight? How do those numbers stack up with Canelo's numbers?
And God forbid that a figure actually comes out, because then what they're going to do is they're going to try to redefine the parameters that define the face of boxing. What exactly makes a fighter the face of boxing when we all know what it is? It's the fighter who generates the most money.
At the gate and at the box office.
That's the way it's always been.
You're just trying to lower the bar of standard for this mediocre fighter and his mediocre metrics.
Mediocre!
That's what it is. The amount of energy that goes into gaslighting the boxing community into thinking that Gervonta Davis is this huge star.
Mediocre!
His numbers have been mediocre. It didn't all of a sudden start now. The only time he ever did real numbers, real robust numbers, was with Ryan. The rest of the time it's been abysmal. You guys are just lying to yourselves about
It's
it.
still abysmal now. Hell, it's getting worse.
Tell yourself whatever you like. I'm not buying this fight. And finally, in men's super lightweight news, former IBF champion Subriel Matias will be returning to action early next month to rebound off his shock upset loss to Liamparo in a Taínos versus Aztecas themed boxing card on his island of Puerto Rico.
Thalia versus who?
Taínos versus Aztecas, the Taíno Indios, the indigenous peoples native to those Caribbean islands like Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic.
The Aztecas, the indigenous peoples, some of them indigenous to Mexico.
In layman's terms, it's a Puerto Rico versus Mexico show where every fight on the card pits a Puerto Rican fighter against a Mexican fighter on the island of Puerto Rico. But you will notice that this is not a Matchroom show.
It's not a Matchroom promotion.
Which has given rise to some questions as to whether or not Matchroom still promotes Subriel Matias or has their relationship come to an abrupt end.
Subriel Matias, have you split?
Not really. I mean, under his agreement, if he lost, there wasn't an obligation to have a comeback fight. He's got an opportunity to fight in Puerto Rico, which is great for him. And if the opportunity arises to work together in the future, we'd love to do that. But obviously, he got beat. Every contract's different. You know, sometimes you sign a contract where there's 2 comeback fights. Sometimes there's no comeback fight. Sometimes there's a negotiable comeback fight. He has an opportunity to fight in Puerto Rico. It's good for him to get that win. And we wish him the best, and I'm sure we'll work together again in the future.
You will notice that the ones promoting the show, Juan Ivan Orenjo, Fresh Promotions, these are the same guys that Subriel was already in bed with before he signed to Matchroom. They're the ones at the helm of this promotion.
They're the ones getting him back out there before this year is out, and I think it's wise of them to do so that he can come into the next year off a win and not a loss.
So you will notice what Eddie Hearn said, that because he lost the fight, Matchroom reserved the option to either give him a comeback fight or not. They really don't have to. They're not obligated.
He lost.
So that he's coming back on a show that isn't a Matchroom show, you can make certain inferences that maybe they offered him a comeback fight, but he didn't like the money, or he didn't like the opponent, or maybe they didn't offer him anything because they're not obligated to do so.
Wow.
Could be either one. It could be either way. That Subriel Matias' relationship with Matchroom could have ended one fight into it.
He's fighting some nondescript guy that goes by the name Roberto Ramirez. Kind of looks like Robert Guerrero. Kind of looks like Jose Ramirez.
Kind of looks like Virgil Ortiz.
Roberto Ortiz.
Virgil Ramirez in what is a rebound fight, and I've got nothing against it because he does need one. But I'll tell you something. If he wins this fight, and I feel like he's going to, it would behoove Subriel to keep doing business with Matchroom if he can, and Matchroom should keep doing business with Subriel because a Puerto Rican fighter can be a useful tool in the toolbox for a promoter that intends on doing shows on the East Coast. The Puerto Rican fighter is to the East Coast what the Mexican fighter is to the West and the Southwest. They're good for some tickets.
Given his fan-friendly style, it's a winning combination. A fighter of Puerto Rican descent that's an all-action fighter, a pressure fighter.
A missed opportunity for the PBC, I think. So many fighters they wasted so much money on trying to promote when you had a guy right there who, if you promote him right, he can sell tickets.
I hope that's not a mistake that Matchroom is making now.
Severing ties to Subriel, when you're doing fights on the East Coast, you're about to do one for Jaron Ennis.
He's got Bam fighting on the show, and I've got nothing against Bam fighting on that show, but ideally, you would have Subriel on there also, because there just so happens to be a large Puerto Rican contingent in Philadelphia, like the one in New York. There's one in Philly.
There's also one in Florida. I don't think it's as big as the one in New York or Philly. Better still, ideally, if you're gonna do a show on the East Coast, it's not a bad idea to have a Puerto Rican fighter in your back pocket.
They should keep doing business.
Don't forget that Matchroom is pretty strong at 140 pounds. They've got Regis Prograis and Jack Catterall, rather, the winner of that fight. They've got
Richardson Hitchens, Liam Botto,
Dalton Smith. These are viable options for Subriel Matias if and when the time comes, if he can rebound off his loss to Liam with Roberto.
good options.
The guy he's fighting, Roberto Ramirez, last saw action in December of last year. This fight is set to go down in November of this one, so that means that this guy's been out for roughly 11 months, just 1 month shy of a year. This is a guy that lost the fight to William Zepeda, which gives you insights into how this fight is going to go. If you lost to William, you can lose to Subriel. Guy was stopped by William Zepeda, stopped by Abel Ramos years ago in 2015, and lost a split decision to Carlos Ocampo.
So I think Subriel should be able to handle this guy.
Scheduled for 10 rounds in the men's super lightweight division, it appears that Subriel is not moving up. He's going to keep campaigning at 140 pounds. I haven't heard anything about him wanting a rematch with Liam Botto, but I imagine he might want one. We've seen Subriel in at least one rematch situation, avenging his first professional loss to Petros Ananyan.
Came back and knocked that guy out. I imagine he wants to do the same thing to Liam Botto if given the opportunity.
What else may be flying under the radar is that Subriel parted ways with Panda Nahar, his then trainer, his then corner. So, is that going to affect the way this guy looks? Is he going to look different, fight different?
Whenever a fighter makes a decision after a loss to get a new corner, it gives you the impression that they're blaming them, even if they're not saying it outright.
What other message does it send if you sack the guy after you lose? Now, on this show, there are said to be a number of familiar faces from the island of Puerto Rico. Former champion Subriel Matias, former champion Emmanuel Rodriguez, former world title challenger Javier Cintron. They might do decent business with this thing, and I've noticed a push the last calendar year to bring boxing back to the island of Puerto Rico.
Anybody from Matchroom to Most Valuable Promotions to Solita Promotions to Here and Now with this. Fresh Promotions.
They're doing boxing matches on the island, and they might make out all right.